Picture this moment with me. For a second, you're scrolling through your phone on what happens to be your birthday, and something feels different. Not sad, not happy, just different. Like you're watching your own life from the outside, wondering when exactly you stopped feeling that electric anticipation that used to keep you awake the night before your special day. When did birthdays transform from magical countdowns into casual calendar notifications? When did the day that once felt like the center of the universe quietly slip into the background noise of ordinary life? This isn't a story about growing cold or losing joy. This is about something far more complex, far more human. It's about the subtle psychology of people who've learned to carry their celebrations internally, who've discovered that the loudest joys aren't always the deepest ones. There's a fascinating psychological phenomenon happening here, one that most of us experience but rarely discuss. Somewhere between childhood wonder and adult responsibility, our relationship with our own birthday undergoes a profound transformation. It's not that we stop caring, it's that we start caring differently. Child psychologists have long studied what they call temporal self-awareness, essentially how we understand our place in time. Children experience birthdays as pure, concentrated excitement because their sense of time is immediate and intense. Every day feels enormous to a 7-year-old, so a birthday feels cosmic. But as we mature, our temporal perspective expands. A year becomes a smaller fraction of our total experience. What once felt like an eternity between birthdays now feels like a blink. The anticipation that used to build for weeks gets compressed into a fleeting moment of recognition. Yet there's something deeper happening beneath this natural developmental shift. For many adults, treating their birthday like an ordinary day becomes an emotional strategy, a way of managing expectations, protecting vulnerability, and maintaining equilibrium in a world that often feels unpredictable. Let me paint you a psychological portrait that might feel familiar. Imagine someone, maybe someone you know, maybe yourself, who consistently downplays their birthday. They smile when others mention it, they graciously accept well wishes, but they don't plan anything special. They don't drop hints, they don't create expectations, they don't even really acknowledge it to themselves until the day arrives. This isn't indifference, this is sophisticated emotional architecture. What's happening in the minds of these individuals is a complex form of what psychologists call pre-emptive emotional regulation. Their brains have learned, through experience, that managing expectations downward creates a buffer against disappointment. It's not that they don't want to be celebrated, it's that they've unconsciously calculated that the risk of unmet expectations outweighs the potential joy of fulfilled ones. Think about the mathematics of emotional investment. Every time we allow ourselves to hope for something, a surprise party, thoughtful gifts, meaningful gestures, we create vulnerability. We open ourselves to the possibility of disappointment. And disappointment, especially around something as symbolically loaded as our birthday, can feel disproportionately painful, because it touches on our fundamental need to be seen and valued. So the mind develops a clever workaround. Reduce the investment, reduce the risk, treat the day normally, and anything positive that happens feels like a bonus rather than an expectation met or missed. But here's where this story gets really interesting, really human. Beneath that casual, it's just another day. Exterior, something else is often happening. A quiet form of attention that the conscious mind might deny, but the emotional mind never stops tracking. Who remembered without being reminded? Who reached out first? Who made an effort that went beyond the perfunctory social media notification? Even the most emotionally self-sufficient people find themselves unconsciously taking inventory, even if they'd never admit it. This creates what researchers call covert monitoring, a psychological state where we're simultaneously not expecting anything and carefully observing everything. It's like being a detective at your own crime scene, gathering evidence of care while maintaining plausible deniability about caring. The fascinating thing is that this covert monitoring often reveals more about our relationships than any grand gesture could. When you're not asking for attention, the attention you receive feels more authentic, more voluntary, more meaningful. It's the difference between applause you've requested and applause that arises spontaneously. There are, also something uniquely modern about this phenomenon. Our grandparents' generation often had more structured social rituals around birthdays, family gatherings that happened regardless of individual preference, community celebrations that were expected rather than optional. The social fabric itself created birthday significance. But in our current cultural moment, with its emphasis on individual choice and personal authenticity, we've gained the freedom to define our own relationship with celebration. This freedom is beautiful, but it also places the entire emotional burden on our personal relationships and internal resources. When birthday celebration becomes something you have to orchestrate for yourself, it can start to feel performative rather than genuine. Many adults would rather skip the day entirely than feel like they're fishing for attention or trying to convince others to care. This shift reflects broader changes in how we navigate intimacy and connection. In a world where vulnerability often feels risky, where people are busy and distracted, where relationships require more intentional maintenance, some individuals choose to reduce their emotional exposure by making their needs smaller, quieter, more manageable. Let's dive into what's actually happening in the brain during these birthday dynamics. Neuroscientists have discovered that anticipation and disappointment activate remarkably similar neural pathways to physical pain. When we expect something emotionally significant to happen, and it doesn't, our brains process it as a genuine injury. This is why birthday disappointments can feel so disproportionately painful. It's not just about the missed party or forgotten card. It's about what those oversights represent in terms of our social bonds and personal worth. The brain interprets these moments as threats to our survival within our social group. Understanding this helps explain why some people develop what we might call anticipatory emotional flatlining around their birthdays. If the brain has learned that birthday expectations often lead to pain, it will naturally try to minimize those expectations as a protective measure. But here's the neurological plot twist. The same brain regions that process disappointment also process surprise and gratitude. When we're not expecting anything, and something lovely happens, the neural reward is actually amplified. The brain releases more dopamine, more oxytocin, more of the chemicals associated with joy and connection. So people who treat their birthdays like ordinary days might actually be setting themselves up for more intense positive experiences when positive things do occur. It's emotional jujitsu, using the brain's own protective mechanisms to create space for genuine surprise and delight. There's a beautiful paradox at the heart of this psychology. The people who seem to need the least are often the ones who've learned to give the most. Think about it. Individuals who don't make a big deal of their own birthdays are frequently the same people who remember everyone else's special moments, who show up with thoughtful gestures, who create the kind of warmth they don't ask for in return. This isn't coincidence. It's emotional intelligence in action. These individuals have learned that creating joy for others is both more reliable and more fulfilling than waiting for others to create joy for them. They've discovered that being the source of celebration feels more empowering than being the recipient of it. But this emotional independence comes with its own challenges. When you become known as someone who doesn't need much, people often take you at your word. They assume your self-sufficiency extends to not wanting gestures of care. This can create an invisible barrier around people who are actually quite tender-hearted, but have learned to present themselves as emotionally low maintenance. Here's something beautiful that emerges from understanding this psychology. The people who treat their birthdays quietly often speak and understand a different language of care. They notice the small things, the unprompted text message, the remembrance of a detail from months ago, the offer of company without any special occasion. Their emotional radar is calibrated to subtlety rather than spectacle. A 5-minute phone call might mean more to them than an elaborate party. A handwritten note might resonate more deeply than an expensive gift. They've learned to find nourishment in gestures that others might overlook entirely. This creates opportunities for incredibly meaningful connection, but only if the people around them understand this different emotional vocabulary. It requires friends and family to pay attention in new ways, to notice what isn't being asked for, to offer care without being prompted. One of the most interesting aspects of birthday psychology is how it reveals the seasonal nature of our emotional needs. Just as our bodies crave different things at different times of year, our hearts have seasons too. Some years a person might genuinely feel content letting their birthday pass quietly. Other years that same person might find themselves unexpectedly tender, quietly hoping someone will make a fuss. The key insight here is that the emotional needs aren't fixed. Someone who typically treats their birthday like an ordinary day isn't necessarily someone who will always feel that way. Life circumstances, stress levels, recent losses or gains, the quality of their current relationships, all of these factors influence whether a birthday feels like a celebration or just another day on the calendar. This variability is part of what makes birthday psychology so complex and so human. We're not static beings with unchanging preferences. We're dynamic creatures whose emotional needs shift with the seasons of our lives. People who've moved away from traditional birthday celebration often discover something profound: the difference between presence and presence. When you're not focused on gifts or parties or external markers of celebration, you become available for a different kind of recognition. The recognition of your own growth, resilience, and journey. This internal birthday celebration might look like taking a long walk and reflecting on the year that's passed. It might mean cooking yourself a favorite meal and eating it mindfully. It might involve writing in a journal, calling an old friend, or simply spending time in nature. These quiet celebrations aren't consolation prizes for real birthdays. They're often deeper, more sustaining, more personally meaningful than any external party could be. They represent a kind of emotional maturity that values authenticity over performance, substance over spectacle. When someone models this quieter approach to their own birthday, it often gives others permission to examine their own relationship with celebration and attention. It challenges the cultural assumption that bigger is always better, that more visible means more meaningful. This can be incredibly liberating for people who've always felt pressured to perform excitement they don't genuinely feel, or to organize celebrations they don't actually want. Seeing someone else treat their birthday with calm appreciation rather than elaborate fanfare can feel like permission to be authentic about their own preferences. At its core, birthday psychology is really about the fundamental human need to be seen and acknowledged. But what many people discover as they mature is that being truly seen has very little to do with parties or presents or public recognition. It has to do with being understood, being accepted, being valued for who you are rather than what you do. When someone treats their birthday like an ordinary day, they're often making a statement about where they find their sense of worth. They're saying, "I don't need a special day to feel valuable because I've learned to find value in everyday moments." This represents a profound form of emotional security, the ability to feel significant without external validation. But this doesn't mean they've transcended the need for connection. If anything, it often means they've developed more sophisticated ways of recognizing and appreciating connection when it appears. They notice the friend who remembers their coffee order, the colleague who asks how they're really doing, the family member who shares a memory unprompted. One of the most challenging aspects of this psychology is learning to receive care gracefully when it's offered. People who've become comfortable with emotional self-sufficiency sometimes struggle to let others give to them. They worry about being a burden, about creating obligations, about disrupting the carefully maintained balance of their relationships. This can create a secondary layer of birthday complexity, not just managing their own expectations, but managing their discomfort with others' gestures. Learning to say thank you without immediately reciprocating or minimizing the gesture becomes its own form of emotional growth. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this entire psychological journey is how it represents an evolution of joy rather than an abandonment of it. The people who treat their birthdays quietly haven't given up on happiness. They've refined their understanding of what happiness means. They've discovered that joy doesn't have to be scheduled or orchestrated or performed. It can exist in the space between breaths, in the recognition of growth, in the gratitude for another year of learning and loving and becoming. This joy is quieter than childhood excitement, but it's also more sustainable, more integrated into daily life. If someone in your life treats their birthday like an ordinary day, this understanding offers an invitation. It invites you to pay attention differently, to notice the small ways they show care for others, to recognize that their quiet approach to celebration might actually represent a sophisticated form of emotional wisdom. It invites you to consider that a simple "I'm glad you were born" might mean more than any elaborate gesture. It invites you to understand that presence, really being with someone, really seeing them, might be the most meaningful gift you can offer. The beautiful contradiction at the heart of all this is that people who claim not to care about their birthdays often care the most. They just care differently. They care about authenticity over performance, about quality over quantity, about being known over being celebrated. Understanding this psychology doesn't mean we should stop celebrating birthdays or assume everyone wants to be left alone on their special day. It means we should pay attention to the language of care that different people speak, recognizing that love shows up in many forms. Some hearts need fireworks, others need stillness. Both are valid, both are beautiful, Both deserve to be honored. The key is learning to recognize which kind of heart you're dealing with, including your own. In the end, the psychology of treating your birthday like an ordinary day represents a quiet revolution in how we think about celebration, attention, and self-worth. It's a movement away from external validation toward internal recognition, from performative joy toward authentic contentment. This doesn't mean it's better or worse than traditional birthday celebration. It's simply different, and it deserves to be understood on its own terms. It represents one path among many toward emotional maturity, toward finding sustainable ways to honor our existence and growth. Whether your birthday feels like the most important day of the year or just another date on the calendar, whether you crave attention or prefer solitude, whether you plan elaborate celebrations or quiet reflections, all of these approaches are valid expressions of your unique relationship with time, meaning, and connection. The goal isn't to convince anyone to celebrate one way or another. The goal is understanding that behind every approach to birthdays lies a complex psychology, a personal history, a set of needs and fears and hopes that deserve recognition and respect. Because at the end of the day, whether we celebrate with fireworks or silence, with crowds or solitude, with parties or walks in the woods, we're all doing the same thing, marking time, acknowledging growth, and honoring the mysterious gift of being alive for another year. And that perhaps is worth celebrating in whatever way feels most true.